In a moment, we'll hear from Gosia Klatz, President of the Australian Institute of Polish Affairs, AIPA, our co-host tonight, who will formally introduce our guest. Since the impact of COVID last year, ASPJ has pivoted to hosting online webinars, panels, and events. We've had many successful events, with our last one 2 weeks ago, a panel discussion on Jewish Łódź today. We have also hosted conversations and presentation with Holocaust historian Jan Grabowski, the Polish historian who's just in the last few weeks won an appeal after being sued in Poland for his work on Poles' involvement in anti-Jewish crimes in World War II and thereafter. We have also hosted Polish Chief Rabbi Michael Szudrych, Michael Rubenfeld, Director of Festivals, discussing his iconic The Lucky Jew project, and Dariusz Popilia, a Polish Olympian and founder of People, Not Numbers. Recordings of all of these, as well as much more material, is available on our website, polishjews.org.au, and our recently launched YouTube channel, which you just search for as ASPJ. Our last webinar on Jewish Łódź today is up to and combined almost 1,000 views on our various platforms. I said then that what we'll try then is to keep politics out of it and focus on our topic, Jewish Lodge. Tonight, though, politics is the topic, and it is quite topical. Many of us would have read in recent weeks plenty of articles and strong opinion pieces about the state of Polish-Israel diplomatic relations. Concerningly, we find ourselves now at a seemingly uncomfortable juncture. These are not issues that the ASPJ shies away from or ignores, even though they may be difficult. In fact, webinars like tonight confront these issues, engages, grapples, and discusses them. This goes to the very core of one of the functions of the ASPJ. Our statement of purpose is to preserve and promote the historical and cultural heritage of Jewish life in Poland and to foster understanding between current and future generations of the Polish and Jewish communities. The purpose of tonight's webinar is to help us gain a deeper understanding of the current relationship between the Polish and Israeli and Jewish communities. Agnieszka Magdziak-Miszewska, as Ambassador of Poland in Israel from 2006 to 2012, and a former consul-general in New York, is highly regarded by American Jewish leaders, and having held a number of government positions as an advisor on Polish-Jewish relations, is well placed to offer her views of the historical development and current status of Poland-Israeli relations. The former ambassador is now retired from the foreign ministry and her roles in public service, so she's no longer necessarily restrained or contained by what she has to say. After her introduction by Gosia, Agnieszka will present. Following, we'll have a question and answer session. Please type your questions in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to go through them, time permitting. As always, if the questions are succinct and respectful, it'll be appreciated. Finally, the ASPJ flagship production, its newsletter, Haint magazine, has published its Spring Rosh Hashanah 2021 edition. If anyone wishes to join our mailing list for Haint or to be informed of upcoming webinars and events, please leave your email address in the Q&A box as well. The ASPJ thanks AIPA for co-hosting with us tonight. And I now hand over to Gosia to formally introduce our guests for what promises to be a fascinating and challenging conversation.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you for your welcome and for your introductions. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Agnieszka Magdziak-Miszewska. My name is Gosia Klatz. I am the president of AIPA and the associate professor at the University of Melbourne. The Australian Institute of Polish Affairs is an independent, voluntary, non-political organization founded almost 30 years ago. It seeks to develop stronger and more diversified ties between Poland and Australia by inviting and organizing meetings with expert speakers, both Polish and Australian. We publicize events relevant to Polish-Australian relations, but also engage in more difficult conversations. And we've been very actively involved in all aspects of Polish-Australian relations, but also paid a special attention to promoting Polish-Jewish dialogue and understanding. So ASPJ and AIPA have had a long-lasting and very fruitful collaboration for decades, and it is my great pleasure to jointly organize this webinar on relations between Poland and Israel. We are extremely fortunate to have with us today a former ambassador of the Republic of Poland in Israel, Agnieszka Magdziak-Miszewska. She held the ambassadorial post between 2006 and 2012, and then was a deputy director of the Foreign Affairs Department at the Ministry of National Defense. She held a number of positions as an advisor on Polish-Jewish relations to the Council of Ministers since 1998. So thank you, Agnieszka, for agreeing to present today at our webinar. And we suggested a title, Israel and Poland, Friends or Enemies? So we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Gosia and Ezra. It's my great pleasure to be your guest tonight. I should start with my hope that Poland and Israel will never be enemies, even if we are in the middle of the deepest crisis since the re-establishment of the two-state relations in 1990. What I will go through the history, shortly, through the history of bilateral relations between Israel and Poland. And then I try to describe what has happened in reality between two countries in August this year. We should start with the statement that Poland, then communistic Poland, was among those countries who very shortly recognized the new state of Israel in 1948. The declaration of the independence of Israel was held in May. In September the same year, two countries decided to open embassies in Warsaw and Tel Aviv. And until 1967, I should say relations were proper. Not so good, not so worse, just like between the free and communistic country can be. Okay, and in 1967, under the pressure of Moscow, after the 6 Days War, relations were broken with a very tough and unpleasant way from the Polish side. One of the first decisions taken by the first non-communistic government established at the end of 1989 and led by Tadeusz Mazowiecki was to re-establish the relations, and it was taking very shortly. But second and the deeper thinking and understanding which drive this decision was how to re-establish not the official relations, but how to build the trust between two governments. That was a time of big migration, of big aliyah of the Russian Jews, the Soviet Jews to Israel. It was very hard for Israel at that time to convince the European governments to help them with this aliyah, with the transfer to Russian Jews to Israel. Because of different reasons. yes, some Western countries were not too were not too ready to help Israel in the facing the Arab threats and Arab minorities in their countries. Some were unready, undecided. So Tadeusz Mazowiecki and our government took the decision that we will be the center for transition, for transfer of Russian Jews to Israel. And we became, and the operation called Bridge was very successful. But at the same time, that was the beginning, not only the building the trust, but also to building the cooperation between Polish and Israeli intelligence, military intelligence and civil intelligence communities. That was very important, and thanks to our Israeli partners, the first unit of Polish special forces was built. Since that time, even before the relations in the let's say between the civil ministries and the intelligence community were started to be very strong and deep, and I should say that was one of the accomplishments of both sides during this 30 years. The decade of 90s was devoted mostly to build the low infrastructures. Sorry, I didn't close my, okay. Oh, okay. So to build the low infrastructures for the former actions. Yes, the bunch of agreements were signed, but I should say the cooperation was not very successful because of this lack of trust. A lot of historical stereotypes on both sides, because of the memory of many of the Polish Jewish Israelis, Holocaust survivors from Poland. And so the next governments of Poland, but also Israeli governments realized that let's say we can sign a lot of documents, but they will be only the papers. So if we will not create the contacts between two societies, the cooperation, the crisis can come, and the cooperations will be broken again. And since the end of 90s, the cooperation between people were established. I should mention the close cooperations between the history teachers of both countries. They prepared a very special book for the guides, for the Israeli guides in Poland and Polish guides in so-called Holy Land, including the Israeli history and the Polish Jewish history. There was a close cooperation between professionals and between the cities. The more than 20 cities in Poland and in Israel signed so-called Sister Cities program, which took this official cooperate to the deeper level, to the level close to the people. And very important was so-called Polish year in Israel and Israeli year in Poland, 2008-2009. We in Poland decided to bring first, before opening the Polish year, to bring to Poland more than 200 of Israeli public opinion makers. I mean, journalists, publicists, representatives of the publish houses, of theaters, galleries, filmmakers, with one task: please look closely to the Polish offer, and decide. You will decide what we should bring to Israel to be presented to Israeli opinion. So there were more than 207 different events during this year, and it was, I think, a breaking point between two societies. That was the closest cooperation, creating the real public diplomacy and public vote for being friendly countries. In 2008, once Polish then Prime Minister Donald Tusk visited Israel, and he declared that Poland will take upon itself the role of a defender or translator of the Israeli moves and Israeli decisions on the forum of European Union, which became a very important issue in our relations. In the year 2011, two governments decided that time came to call our relations strategic and to conduct every year consultations on the ministerial governmental level. The first consultations took place in Jerusalem in 2011, the next year in Warsaw. Those consultations were conducted until 2016. There were last consultation taken in Warsaw by the present government, and then the idea, I don't know, probably was probably two governments or Polish government decided that this idea was not so important to be prolonged. To mention how the cooperation was close, I should mention also the yearly consultations between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministries of Defense, and permanent dialogue without necessity to make official visits, but only, let's say, phone or mail consultations taken by two governments. So that was the situation. At that was the situation, I should say, well, okay, I should say in 2015, where the Law and Justice Party became a new government in Poland. At the beginning, I think that the representatives of this party wanted to conduct the relations at the high level and continue also the relations between, support relations between historians, between schools, between the cities, economical cooperation, common research and development projects, military cooperation. But since 2017, the new idea became more important than any international relations, not only with Israel. The idea to create the new story about the Polish nation with the purpose to bring the voters, to bring the public opinion closer to the ruling party. The idea is as such. Poland was always tolerant country, was always open to everybody, was always ready to fight for freedom, not only Polish freedom, but also the freedom of our neighbors. During the Holocaust, there was, I'll be ironic, there was a competition between the Poles who will save more Jews, of course, and anything like Polish involvement in the Holocaust never happened. The story was also told about Polish-Ukrainian history, Polish-German history, and so on, so on, so on, so on. So the relations started to how to describe it? Started to be, let's say, business as usual. Not so important, not so worse, but the idea of the new narrative about Poland created problems. First of it was so-called new law on IPN, Institute of Polish
National Remembrance.
Of Polish nation, of Polish remembrance, yes. The novelization of this law, which now is seen only in the context of the Polish-Jewish relations, was not the real purpose, was not to fight with the Holocaust historians, but the Ukrainian historians and the history of Polish-Ukrainian relations, especially during the Second World War. Holocaust was added to this whole story. But if the Ukrainians were not prepared for maintaining the campaign of the law on the international arena, this Holocaust novelization became the first and main issue. The clue of this novelization was that everybody who claims that Poles were involved in the Holocaust, or the Polish nation was involved in the Holocaust, will be persecuted, including the jail penalty until 3 years. The purpose was to froze especially the Polish researchers, to tell them that they should look for another theme of their researches, not Polish Jewish. If Polish Jewish only in this official narrative of helping the Jewish people during the Holocaust. But at that time, the government of Mateusz Mazowiecki realized that the novelization can create not only the problems in Polish-Israeli relations, but also with Polish-American relations, even if the President of the United States, Donald Trump, was very open for cooperation with Poland, but he couldn't avoid his public opinion. So with the mediation of the American administration, the diplomatic dialogue between Poland and Israel started, and it ended with the common Polish-Israeli declaration signed by Morawiecki and Benjamin Netanyahu in the same year, 2018. The declaration, which I should say, I can't understand why Benjamin Netanyahu decided to sign it. Because in this declaration, the position, or let's say the condemnation of anti-Semitism were at the same level as the condemnation of so-called anti-Polonism, which are, you know, the phrases, the historical are completely different. Yes, nobody was killed by the anti-Polish joke, but millions of people were killed because of the anti-Semitism. So I don't understand really why Bibi decided to sign such a declaration. But the price was the change of the novelization of the law, and to let the historians do their work. The second wave of not anti-Israeli, but anti-Jewish excesses in Poland was started after the law called 47, and so-called hairless law adopted by the US Congress. Those anti-Semitic manifestations were supported by many representatives of the government. And it created and the relations started to deteriorate because the trust between two governments was broken. So the law, the administrative law adopted by the Polish parliament in August was received as well in Israel as in the United States, as among the international jury, as especially made against the Jewish people, especially the Polish Jews and their descendants. Why? In this moment, I should state that Poland was the only European country which never solved the issue of the restitution of the property of its citizens taken first by the Nazis, the Germans, and secondly by the communists. But I should also stress that the first Polish government had in mind that the issue of the restitution will be important in the future. So it decided to create so-called restitution fund. And about 10% from every privatization of former state-owned properties were transferred to this fund. So when the only government in this history, the government of Jerzy Buzek, decided to solve the restitution problem once and forever in 1998, they had funding almost for a part of the future claims. The law started with the very important sentence that everybody who was Polish citizen in the day of 1st September 1939, when war was started, is eligible, together with their descendants, to participate in the restitution and to make claims to the Polish government. The law was transferred to the Polish parliament, and unfortunately, two parties, post-communistic party plus the nationalistic party, League of Polish Families, decided to change this first sentence, changing year 1939 to 1989. So according to this novelization, eligible for the restitution were only present Polish citizens. So the President Kwaśniewski, at that time president, has no choice. He vetoed this law, telling that everything can be solved by the courts, and that everybody is eligible to appeal to the courts, to present the documents, and to start the restitution. But with but with this, but since that moment, not only the eligible, the real heirs of the Polish Jews started to make claims, but also so-called businessmen started their businesses, buying the claims, hiring together with the lawyers, starting to create the false documents, starting to fight for the properties in the name of non-existing or or dead people without any descendants. They were very prosperous, especially in big cities, with former big population, like in Warsaw. Yes, with 1/3 of the population, 1/3 Jewish population before the war. That created the situation where people, Polish, present Polish citizens, living in those privatized houses, were forced to leave their apartments. Sorry, I must tell my dog to behave. To leave the houses without any compensation. And that was a situation with the complete trust in law, with law uncertainty. So in the year 2015, the Polish Constitutional Court decided that this situation should be that this situation is impossible, and that the government have to do everything to make the certainty of law be back again. And that was a background for this last new law introduced by the Law and Justice government. On one hand, it was seen by many people, including part of the opposition parties, as a good law, finishing those criminal businesses and giving people the, let's say, peace and hope that they will can live in the houses they owned or they bought legally after the fall of communism. Okay, this is the one part, but the second is that there are many people and their descendants, not only the Jewish people, I should stress it, not only people, but also the Polish people, as well in the country, as well living abroad. Those who were forced to live abroad by the communists to stay abroad after the Second World War II, like the former Polish soldiers fighting in the framework of Western allies on the Western fronts, like Polish landowners representatives of Polish aristocracy, bankers, so on and so on, so on, so on. So this is a problem not only for the Polish Jews, but also for the Polish people, even those who are living in the country now with Polish citizenship. Why? Because, let's say, the courts in Poland are very, very, very slowly. The case of my husband lasts almost 20 years to back the land to his land to the family now. And this is the real problem, and I'm afraid that the Polish authorities knew what problems it will create, but it's very sad to me to say that there is no foreign policy or real diplomacy in my country now. Everything what is done is done only for the voters, or let's say to increase the vote, the people ready to vote for the party, for this government. So there was any consultations. It was so obvious, yes. Like many times in the contemporary history, that the decision taken by Poland can create or will create the problems with the relations with other countries. But we've had the diplomacy, yes, the silent conversations, the silent dialogue to find a solution, or let's say or almost to explain the Polish position to its partners. Not in this case. And unfortunately, we have also new government in Israel with a very famous former journalist, Yair Lapid. I personally knew his father, and I appreciate his, let's say, his smartness, his pragmatism, and his openness. Yair Lapid was decided to attack Poland not only on this law, but also to call Poland anti-Semitic, racial, undemocratic country, to ask Charge d'Affaires of Israel to come to Poland, to Israel, and to advise our ambassador to stay in Poland on vacations and not to come back to Israel. So it started. So the whole ping-pong process, or let's say ping-pong and diplomacy, started at this moment, because Polish government answered, evacuating ambassadors' children to Poland as they can be, I don't know, killed in Israel by the Israeli people. And we have the deepest crisis on our relations in 30 years. I don't believe that that no Polish nor Israeli government would be ready to change their position. So I no hope. I do not hope that we will come to the business as usual, if not to the better stage of the relations. But on both sides, we have an assets. We work hardly to have these assets in reality and in the future. There are the societies of two societies, Polish and Israeli society. Not only those who are working in the non-governmental organizations like Polish-Israeli Friendship Society, yes, of the Society of Polish and Israeli academics. No, common people on both sides who during the last 20 years used to cooperate with their partners, used to visit both countries. Poles who started to visit Israel for Israel, not for being a Holy Land. And Israelis who started to visit Poland as Poland, not only as the site of the Holocaust. In 1918, 1917, Hebrew was the second after English language heard on the streets of the Polish cities. You can find Israeli families traveling through our mountains or vacationing on our lakes. And for me, as a person who devoted much more than 30 years of my own life of Polish-Jewish relations and Polish-Israeli relations, this is the only, but I believe strong hope for the future. I will end with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. That's for your overview on the history and the development of Polish, Israel and Jewish relations and the depressing state we are in now. And the looking forward, it seems to be that, as you suggested, is popular with both sets of societies to have a downgrade of relations, at least from a political level. We have a bit of time left. We'll just go through a few questions if we can. The first one I want to ask you is, as ambassador from Poland to Israel, how heavy did you feel the Jewish memory of Poland and a lot of the unresolved issues or even the taboo subjects that are not discussed hang over almost you every day that you are representing Poland?
I should say that I served in Israel in the best ever times for both countries' relations. And it was obvious that there will be problems and that the restitution issue is still very important, and if we will not solve it, let's say the full trust, mainly of the people. Yes, because when we are talking about the Israeli government and its involvement in the restitution issue, it started, let's say, about 2004, 2005. As Israel probably, I don't know, decided that this issue will be mainly conducted by the World Jewish Restitution Organization or World Jewish Congress or American administration, and the restitution policy started only with the Clinton government, when this Q. Eisenstadt became the Undersecretary of State. That was this big conference of the Holocaust era property held in Washington in 2000. So I believe that was not an issue. And what I've seen, what I heard from Israelis was that if we will propose any paper with the proposals of solving this issue, let's say until 10% of recompensation, financial compensation, Israel will take upon itself the defense of this proposition. But unfortunately, even our very open for Israel, very open for cooperation, strategic cooperation government wasn't ready to take such a decision, unfortunately. And I can say only thank you for my former foreign minister.
Thank you.
It was.
Next question I have is,
but I
was going to say, do you notice a difference? Did you notice a difference between the New York Jews' attitude to Poland and the Israeli attitude to Poland?
Oh.
And do you want to give us a small description of what that may be?
Absolutely. You know, that was a big difference when I was asked in Israel if I feel uncomfortable because there are people blaming Poland for this and that. I said, in the comparison of the meetings with the representatives of the American Jews, I can feel, you know, like home. This is probably a result of educational system. Generally, if people are not historians, specialists, they don't know in the United States nothing about the Second World War, where it started, how it started, what was the fate of the Polish population during the Second World War. Absolutely nothing. The knowledge is based on popular movies or television series like Holocaust, like Shoah, and so the questions were very strange questions, and also the blamings are very strange. For example, I've heard many times that were Poles who conducted Jews to the trains to Auschwitz, and so you know, if Rabbi Shudrich once in the conversation in the Polish consulate said that was not Polish police but the Jewish police in the ghetto, the Jewish teachers were ready to you know, exile him from the Jewish community. So that was a big difference. In Israel, everybody knows that the war started at the 1st of October 1939, and that it started with Poland. So the arguments are different. and the conversation were also different. You know, my attitude is that when I meet a Holocaust survivor and he or she wants to blame me for everything possible good, not good things which happened to him or her, I will never discuss with, because this is his experience, this is his memory. He survived through this, and he has the right to say anything. But the different case are the historians, journalists, and politics using this for their own purposes. And that was very important for me, that we have very close cooperation between Auschwitz Birkenau Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem, that I had the very good contact with Yad Vashem, and but with the Israeli historians, with Yehuda Bauer, and that was, and after this Polish year in Israel, the situation was that if we've been with my husband or with friends at the cafe or in a restaurant, and we've been asked where are you from, and we said Poland. So the answer was, oh, fine, I'm also Polish. My grandmother was from Poland, or my grandfather, or my wife's grandparents are from Poland. So the situation was completely different, and it was also a reason that the attitude of the Polish society towards the Israelis were very open, that we had more than 160,000 Israeli tourists, not the school excursion after to the concentration camps. 160,000 of Israelis coming yearly to Poland, feeling they're safe and just fine. So that was my experience. There were very tough things, very difficult, like my first meeting with Reuven Rivlin, then the speaker of the Israeli parliament, of the Knesset, because his attitude was generally anti-Polish. He is the 5th generation living in Jerusalem, but with the ascendants from Poland, of course. And he was anti-Polish. But we started the deep conversation, the deep dialogue between the visit of the speaker for the Polish parliament to Israel. The conversation started in August. In September, Reuven Rivlin was a guest. The September 1st, he was a guest at the monument in Jerusalem, built by the Polish Jews, by the Polish Jewish soldiers of the Second World War, for our freedom, for your freedom and ours, stating that that the first Jews fighting the Germans were the Polish Jews more than 120 Polish Jews fighting Germans in September 1939. So, you know, everything can be let's say, solved more or less, but I believe more.
Thank you.
Through the conversations.
We've got time for two more questions. The first one is, it seems to be a Polish view that Israel and perhaps the world Jewry is super sensitive and overreacts to some of the legislation passed by Poland. Are they justified in that view? And the second part of that question is, quickly, how much of the diplomatic downgrade is actually just posturing and showing off for the public? In the realms of security cooperation and EU voting, does Poland and Israel still have good relations?
I should say thanks first. So could you? Is
the criticism of Israel that they overreact?
Overreaction. Okay. I should say that there are overreactions of people, of the governments. As you know, Polish governments from time to time are also overreactive when some talk of Polish history. It's natural, but the second thing, and a different thing, is when the governments use the Holocaust issues as an instrument in a policy, foreign policy or internal policy. This is something else, and it should be condemned and it should be confronted. Holocaust is not an issue to be taken as an instrument for anything. So this is one thing. The second, but about the European Union, yes, Poland was seen for a long time, even under the Law and Justice government, as very useful partner on the EU arena by the Israelis. Probably one of the reasons why Bibi Netanyahu decided to sign this strange declaration was that he thought that it's not such a high price for Poland's help on this European Union arena. That was a time when Israel was mostly isolated in Europe. And at the same time, the self-isolation of Poland in European Union, Poland is isolated and not playing any positive role in Brussels, was a reason why Yair Lapid decided to use such a tough wording to condemn Poland. Poland can't help now, don't want help, and create self-isolation on the international arena very quickly, even with our most important partner, I mean, United States, passing in a sense anti-American law, so-called Lex TVN, against the American Polish television, which is critical to the government. Yes. So probably probably our government think that we are an island at least or almost as big as Australia, and we can count only on us, that the geopolitical position on the geographical map has been changed. I don't know. This is for many people in Poland, for an opposition. This is as we've been taken back 30 years.
Thank you.
Before our times.
The last question we have is, you talked about before, there's quite close relations between researchers in Israel and researchers in Poland and non-governmental organizations and 160,000 tourists coming. Even though the politicians and the governments of the two countries may be squabbling now, how do you suggest in 1 or 2 minutes, those who are not diplomats and those who want to bring the countries together again, what's their best course of action in the future?
On one hand, I should say yes, there is still a very close cooperation between researchers, not only historians, but also common projects are conducted between two institutes of research and development, with two academies. Many of non-governmental organizations cooperate. More than that, many schools cooperate still. And, you know, there's hundreds of tourists because of the pandemic decreased. I believe that they will come back. I should stress that during last 20 years, more than 30,000 Israelis obtained the Polish citizenship. And that some of them are living in Poland. So this is also an important thing. And also the Polish community in Israel is much bigger, with this intermarriages between mainly Polish women and Israelis. But this propaganda and this wording are not good for this process of being together. Because if you hear every day that Israel is blah, 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 blah. Poland is anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli, Russian country. Yes, in Poland that the Jews want to take our properties, everything from us, yes, want to govern Poland. Propaganda works, yes. Mr. Goebbels knew it very well.
Yeah.
But I still have a lot of hope that with the change of the government in Poland, we will quickly can come back to the good relations.
Thank you. And on that positive note, I'll hand over to Gosha to formally close the evening, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. On behalf of AIPA, big thank you to Ezra for hosting tonight, and to all ASPJ and AIPA members for joining us tonight. Thank you, Agnieszka, for this excellent overview of the relations and explaining also the details of the current situation, diplomatic and also the social links, and maybe providing us with just a little bit of hope because you as an expert, as a person who's got deep understanding, if you feel that like there is a sense of, you know, trust in between the societies, and especially hopefully after the pandemic, you know, slowly recedes, we will see re-emerging contacts and relations and visits and so on, and people-to-people contact, and hopefully that will help, you know, in re-establishing those diplomatic relations when the right time comes, which we all hope for. So thank you so much for your presentation. AIPA is organizing the next seminar on the 9th of September, and we have invited Professor Rafał Pankowski, who is a co-founder of Poland's leading anti-racist organization, Never Again. And we will be talking about challenging nationalist extremism in Poland. So I invite you all, you can visit our website, aipa.net.au, to register for the event. Thank you so much, Ezra. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you all for coming, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you so much for appearing.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting me, and please forgive me my mistakes. I should confess I have a pneumonia, but I didn't want. Not connected with COVID. I didn't want to make any troubles. So
thank you.
thank
You did
you.
very well.
Everybody.
Thank you so much.
And
Bye-bye.
stay in good health. All the best.
Good night to everybody. Thank you.
Good night.